Right, we now come to the statement. I call the Chancellor of the Exchequer to make a statement. Right, riferisce Sunak.
Mr. Speaker, on Monday, the Prime Minister set out the action we need to take between now and the start of December to control the spread of coronavirus. In response, we're providing significant extra support to protect jobs and livelihoods in every region and nation of the United Kingdom. An extension to the coronavirus job retention scheme. More generous support to the self-employed and paying that support more quickly. Cash grants of up to £3,000 per month for businesses which are closed, worth over £1 billion every month. £1.6 billion for English councils to support their local economy and local healthcare response. Longer to apply for our loan schemes and the Future Fund. The chance to top up bounce back loans and an extension to the mortgage payment holidays. All on top of more than £200 billion of fiscal support since March. This statement follows the Bank of England's monetary policy decisions earlier today, meaning all economic and monetary institutions are playing their part. As you would expect, the Governor and I are in constant communication as the situation evolves. Our responses are carefully designed to complement each other and provide certainty and support to people and businesses across the UK. The bank's forecast this morning show economic activity is supported by our substantial fiscal and monetary policy action. And the IMF just last week described the UK's economic plan as aggressive, unprecedented, successful in holding down unemployment and business failures, and one of the best examples of coordinated action globally. Mr. Speaker, our highest priority remains the same: to protect jobs and livelihoods. That's why we've already decided to extend the job retention scheme to December. But people and businesses will want to know what comes next, how long we plan to keep the scheme open, and on what terms. They want certainty. The government's intention is for the new health restrictions to remain only until the start of December. But as we saw from the first lockdown, the economic effects are much longer lasting for businesses and areas than the duration of any restrictions. And as the Bank of England have said this morning, the economic recovery has slowed and the economic risks are skewed to the downside. Given this significant uncertainty, a worsening economic backdrop, and the need to give people and businesses security through the winter, I believe it is right to go further. So we can announce today that the furlough scheme will not be extended for 1 month. It will be extended until the end of March. The government will continue to help pay people's wages up to 80% of the normal amount. All employers will have to pay for hours not worked is the cost of employer NICs and pension contributions. We'll review the policy in January to decide whether economic circumstances are improving enough to ask employers to contribute more. Of course, as the furlough itself is now being extended to the end of March, the original purpose of the job retention bonus to incentivize employers to keep people in work until the end of January obviously falls away. Instead, we will redeploy a retention incentive at the appropriate time. And for self-employed people, I can confirm the next income support grant, which covers the period November to January, will now increase to 80% of average profits, up to £7,500. Mr. Speaker, I also want to reassure the people of Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland. The furlough scheme was designed and delivered by the government of the United Kingdom on behalf of all the people of the United Kingdom, wherever they live. That has been the case since March. It is the case now and will remain the case until next March. It is a demonstration of the strength of the Union and an undeniable truth of this crisis. We have only been able to provide this level of economic support because we are a united kingdom. And I can announce today that the upfront guaranteed funding for the devolved administrations is increasing from £14 billion to £16 billion. This Treasury is, has been, and will always be the Treasury for the whole of the United Kingdom. Mr. Speaker, I know that people watching at home will have been frustrated by the changes the government has brought in during the past few weeks. I have had to make rapid adjustments to our economic plans as the spread of the virus has accelerated. So I'd like to take this opportunity to explain how and why this has happened. During the summer, as we began slowly unlocking, it was our hope the country would continue to be economically open, albeit with local restrictions being put in place as and when needed. We knew there would likely be a resurgence in the spread of the virus, but with increased NHS capacity and test and trace, our belief was we would be able to stay ahead of the virus. On this basis, we designed an economic approach which continued providing wage support to people, incentivized businesses to retain staff beyond the end of the furlough scheme, and created new job creation and training schemes such as Kickstart, all built to support an economy that was broadly open, but operating with restrictions and overall lower demand. At the time, this approach was not government acting alone. Our proposals secured wide-ranging support from the TUC to the CBI. It was their hope, as it was ours, that the public health situation would allow us to keep businesses and workplaces open. The virus, however, continued to spread. Localized restrictions were having an impact, and so we intensified this approach and added further areas. As these restrictions intensified, the economic impact, particularly on industries such as the hospitality sector, was significant. So, in response, we altered our approach to wage support, making it much more generous to employers and, in turn, protecting jobs. We also introduced a range of grants to businesses, whether open or closed, to help them meet their fixed costs, and additional funding for local authorities to respond to specific local economic challenges. But again, the virus continued to spread, but more quickly. And so we arrive at last week, when the government's scientific and medical advisors presented data which showed that R is greater than 1 in all parts of the country, that the NHS was at risk of being overwhelmed in a matter of weeks, and the likely resultant loss of life that would accompany such an event. The only viable solution left to protect our NHS was the reimposition of temporary, significant enhanced restrictions in England, in addition to those in Wales, Northern Ireland, and Scotland. And so, given these changed public health restrictions and the economic trauma they would cause in job losses and business closures, I felt it best to extend the furlough scheme rather than transition at that precise moment to the new job support scheme. Now, political opponents have chosen to attack the government for trying to keep the economy functioning and to make sure the support we provide encourages people to keep working. And they will now, no doubt, criticize the government on the basis we have had to change our approach. But to anyone in the real world, that's just the thing you have to do when the circumstances change. We all hope for the best, but make sure we plan for any eventuality. We can reintroduce the furlough now only because we kept the system on which it is based operational, because there was always the possibility that we would be back in this situation. I'll leave it to the people of this country to decide whether they believe the government is trying its best to support people through an unprecedented crisis, to decide whether it is a good or bad thing to alter our economic plans as the health restrictions we face change. What I know is that the support we are providing will protect millions of jobs. What I know is that it is never wrong to convey confidence in this country and our economy through our words and action. And what I know is today's announcement will give people and businesses up and down our country immense comfort over what will be a difficult winter. And I commend this statement to the House.
I now call the Shadow Chancellor and Lee Stocks.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Businesses and workers have been pleading for certainty from this government, but the Chancellor keeps ignoring them until the last possible moment after jobs have been lost and businesses have gone bust. The national lockdown was announced on Saturday, many weeks after both Sage and Labour called for a circuit breaker. The Chancellor ridiculed those proposals for a shorter, more effective circuit breaker as a blunt instrument. Just a moment ago, he argued that it was only last week when the government's scientific and medical advisors presented data showing the NHS was at risk of being overwhelmed. Sage presented that evidence, Mr. Speaker, on the 21st of September. So I'll give him the chance now to correct the record and state that actually the government knew about that evidence many weeks ago rather than last week. He can intervene on me if he wishes to correct the record. No, he hasn't done that. That delay in implementing those measures, we know, has cost livelihoods and lives. Now, when the lockdown was announced, the Prime Minister said furlough would be extended for a month, 5 hours before that scheme was due to end. 2 days later, realising the self-employed had been forgotten, there was a last-minute change to the self-employed scheme. And now, further changes. The Chancellor's fourth version of his winter economy plan in just 6 weeks. The Chancellor can change his mind at the last minute, Mr. Speaker, but businesses can't. We need a Chancellor who's in front of the problems we face, not one who's always a step behind. Hospitality workers in the north, until last Saturday, had to plan on the basis that they would receive 2/3 of their previous income. 2/3, not for so many 80%, or indeed 93%, I think it was the Prime Minister said, but 80% for huge numbers of them because of this government's failure to fix flaws in the social security system. The Chancellor said no to those hospitality workers, only to accept their demands today. The First Minister of Wales, ahead of announcing a fire break, made workable requests that could have offered support for Welsh workers. Again, the Chancellor said no, only to U-turn now. Labour argued that Scotland should have access to the furlough scheme, should there need to be a national lockdown north of the border. Once again, the Chancellor said no. Then the Prime Minister, of course, said yes. Cue another undignified scramble to accept that demand today. How many jobs could have been saved if this government had recognised reality and let businesses plan for the future? Will the Chancellor apologise to those who've already been made redundant because of this last-minute approach? Now, earlier this week, I called on the Chancellor to use the moment of the national lockdown to set out a proper plan for the next 6 months. Finally, today, he's indicated that furlough will remain for lockdown areas until March, as Labour called for. And of course that's welcome, but many other questions remain. When will the Chancellor deliver any information about that retention incentive after Labour's been warning for months that it was poorly targeted? By the time we get to March, it'll be a whole year since the first economic support package, but there's still nothing in the Chancellor's remarks for those people who've been excluded from government schemes until now. What does the Chancellor say to those groups? Will we be facing another scramble before the end of March? Can he guarantee we'll avoid such uncertainty then, dependent, of course, on the health circumstances? Other countries seem to be able to plan for the future. Why can't this one? What's the future of the phantom funding formula, providing a seemingly arbitrary £20 a head to local areas under tiered restrictions for business support? How long will that support last? What happens when it runs out? When will he fix social security so it stops penalising the self-employed, homeowners and huge numbers of other workers facing hardship because of problems that could be fixed quickly? What is his government doing to rectify the problems with the £500 self-isolation payment so that they actually receive it, workers receive it when they need it and aren't pushed into debt for doing the right thing? And above all, when will his government enable all local areas to deliver the test, trace and isolate system when we know this is more effective than the enormously expensive national outsourced system. The Chancellor needs to stop blaming our NHS, as he appeared to do a moment ago, when it's his government that's still blocking local areas in lower tiers from delivering a more effective service. Our economy is struggling more, Mr. Speaker. I'm finishing now, much more than many other countries, because this government simply won't acknowledge that until it gets a grip on the health crisis, it won't be able to deal with our economic crisis. Confidence is indeed key, and that's what this government needs to start delivering. Thank you.
Can I just say to people, we don't have interventions in statements. So if you're wondering why the Chancellor didn't, it's because we don't. No problem at all. I'm just trying to be helpful. Chancellor of the Exchequer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the honourable lady for her questions. And to address them in turn, Mr. Speaker, I think the claim that our action was too late is, in the words of the government's own medical advisors, a misapprehension, because there is no perfect moment at which to enact measures which have far-reaching and damaging consequences for the people and businesses of our country. And we should only enact such measures, Mr. Speaker, when it becomes truly unavoidable. Mr. Speaker, it is also entirely false of the party opposite to claim that if we only did what they suggested, things would somehow be different. This is because the party opposite couldn't actually explain what their position was. At first, it was a circuit breaker for 2 weeks. Then it was an intervention that might last longer. I think we heard yesterday 3 weeks. And then it might be something that would need to be reimposed again and again and again. That, Mr. Speaker, is not a plan that would support the businesses and people of this country. The honourable lady asked about the NHS. We have provided the NHS with tens of billions of pounds to make sure that they can do the very valuable job that they are doing, and they will have our full support over this difficult winter period. She asked about support for local authorities. We have provided just over £1 billion to give local authorities the ability to support their local businesses and economies through the winter period, on top of the direct support that those closed businesses will receive. And she asked about supporting local track and trace efforts. And I agree that is important. And that is why we have provided, on a transparent funding formula, almost up to £500 million to local authorities to so ensure that they can carry out enforcement, compliance and local contact tracing at the level that they need. But, Mr. Speaker, the honourable member opposite called for a 6-month plan, but yet she and her party have not put forward a 6-month plan of their own. But, Mr. Speaker, I understand why. Because they actually know, as most members of this House know, that most people and businesses in this country know, that we are dealing with a once-in-a-century event. Because they know, as most members of this House know, and people and businesses up and down the country know, that in the face of such an unprecedented crisis, the government must be flexible to ever-changing circumstances. It is not a weakness, Mr. Speaker, to be agile and fast-moving in the face of a crisis, but rather a strength, and that will not change.
We now go down to Central Devon to the Chair of the Select Committee. Mel Stride.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And can I just agree with my right honourable friend that taking an iterative approach to these problems as circumstances change is indeed a strength rather than a weakness. But could I just focus for a moment on the lockdown itself? And as my right honourable friend will know, the minutes of the SAGE meeting held on the 21st of September stated, and I quote, "Policymakers will need to consider the analysis of economic impacts and the associated harms alongside this epidemiological assessment. This work is underway under the auspices of the Chief Economist." As my right honourable friend knows, I wrote to him asking that the analysis referred to in these minutes should be provided prior to the vote on lockdown that was held in the House yesterday. This would have helped to have informed that debate. The reply I received did not provide the information requested. So could my right honourable friend confirm that the SAGE minutes are accurate when they state that the Treasury has worked on this analysis under the auspices of its Chief Economist? And if they are accurate, would my right honourable friend confirm that the Treasury will now release this analysis without delay?
Well, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I thank my honourable friend for his question, and he will know that I replied to him and his committee with the answers to his question, that there does not exist a specific prediction or forecast, which I think is what he is asking. But what we did provide, and I'd say the economic evidence that we considered, was the context for the lockdown being imposed and the impact that the initial lockdown has already had, so one could make their own assumptions about what would happen thereafter. He will know as well as I know the OBR are one of our preeminent forecasters, and what they are forecasting already is that the economy falls by about 10% this year, that unemployment reaches 12%, an increase of 2.5 million people, and that in the medium term our economy will suffer scarring of about 3%, which represents tens of billions of pounds of less economic output, and indeed he will of course also know the impact this is having on our public finances. That is the situation as it exists today before we enter the new set of restrictions. Obviously that will cause additional stress on all the numbers that I outlined for him. He will also have seen the Bank of England's comments this morning that the duration of further restrictions will increase their impact of long-term scarring on the economy.
Video link. Alison Thulis.
Thank you very much. I'm tempted to read out the comments I made on Tuesday, or indeed any of the contributions I've made in the last 6 months, because it feels like I've been arguing for exactly the same things for the UK government all this time. And the reality is that Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland and the north of England have been dinghied by this Chancellor until he was forced to lock down in England. Now, I'm glad that furlough and the self-employment support scheme has been extended to March, but we should be clear that this kind of support is not unique to the UK, and countries of all sizes have been supporting their people, and many of them have done it more competently and more generously than the UK. Can he confirm that the furlough scheme is not tied to any particular tier and it will be available to all who need it at 80%? And would he refrain from cutting it back to 60% as before, because that cost many businesses and many employees dearly? Many businesses are as good as closed, especially in hospitality and tourism, travel, events and culture, and they need ongoing support. I return to the issue of the excluded from the support schemes, and it's disgraceful and it's unacceptable that there is still nothing in this statement for them after 8 months. Can the Chancellor tell me why he is still choosing to ignore 3 million people across these islands? Many sectors of the economy in which they work are not going back to normal anytime soon. I spoke to Scottish hospitality reps this morning, and they are deeply worried about the winter months ahead. They're increasingly indebted, and 70 to 100,000 jobs are at risk. It would help them immensely if the VAT cuts that the Chancellor had previously announced could be made permanent. I welcome the additional £2 billion for Scotland, because Scotland's been able to provide hospitality businesses with rates relief, but we need clarity on the future longer-term funding to plan ahead. A growing number of businesses cannot afford to pay for redundancies should they go bust. So what provision is the Chancellor making for supporting those who may yet lose their jobs as businesses go to the wall? Will he extend the £20 uprating of universal credit into the year ahead as well? Will he expand it to legacy benefits, because those in legacy benefits are really struggling? Will he enhance statutory sick pay? And will he listen to Maternity Action and Pregnant Then Screwed on their demands for women to be kept safe and their incomes protected? This has been a complete buruk, but it doesn't need to be. Will the Chancellor work with all parties and with the devolved institutions? And at the very least, could he give the Cabinet Secretary for Finance in Scotland, Kate Forbes, the courtesy of a phone call?
Mr. Deputy Speaker, I'm glad the Honourable Lady welcomed the extension of job support through to next year. And with regards to Scotland, I think it's clear that even the First Minister has conceded that this generous support currently available in Scotland is only possible and affordable because we have a Treasury that represents the whole of the United Kingdom. I can confirm that, of course, the CGRS is a UK-wide scheme, and we will continue to apply the furlough to each part of the UK equally, treating every citizen, no matter which region of the nation they live in, the same. Mr. Speaker, the Honourable Lady also asked some specific questions. I'm happy to provide her with the answers. Scotland will receive an upfront guarantee today worth £8 billion. That's an increase of £1 billion on the previously agreed upfront guarantee. And it's that funding, Mr. Speaker, for the Scottish Government to use as they see fit. So the Honourable Lady asked many questions about supporting businesses and people. It is, of course, up to the Scottish Government to make those choices to what to do with our extra £1 billion, and we will look forward to hearing what they do plan to do with that additional funding. And it's also worth bearing in mind, as we hear from the Honourable Lady about the future Scottish budget, that the Scottish Government has the ability to raise taxes. The Scottish Government has the ability to raise the funds it needs to fund the various projects that they would like to. And if these things are important, then of course the Scottish Government will be able to make those decisions on behalf of their people and be held accountable for those.
Dr. Liam Fox.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and can I thank my right honourable friend for demonstrating the strength of the Union and showing that with the best will in the world, the Scottish Government would not have the ability to have the resources to protect Scottish jobs in this way. But is it not now more important than ever that across the whole of the United Kingdom we stimulate wealth creation, creating new goods and services using the natural creativity and innovation of all the people of the United Kingdom? And can we look forward to my right honourable friend using his considerable energy to bring forward proposals in this area based on sound, financially prudent conservative principles?
Well, can I thank my honourable friend, and I absolutely agree, and he knows better than most the power of the Union and has seen it demonstrated countless times over the years of his service. And he is also right about the power of free enterprise to drive our recovery, and I can give him every reassurance that those sound free enterprise principles will be at the heart of everything that we do and ensure that we have a swift and generous recovery that will benefit citizens wherever they live.
Video link. Margaret Greenwood.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker. The Chancellor's U-turn on furlough comes after intense lobbying by the TUC, the CBI, Labour and leaders in the Liverpool City region. Can the Chancellor explain why workers in the North were expected to get by on 67% of their pre-crisis wages when Tier 3 restrictions were put in place, but that has now changed to 80% once areas in the south of the country are being locked down? And will he give a cast iron guarantee the people in Wirral West that workers in the North will never again be treated as second-class citizens?
Mr. Speaker, it's simply not the case that the wage support schemes we've put in place differentiate between people on the basis of where they live. All the schemes, whether it's the furlough scheme or the job support scheme, treat people equally wherever they live in every region or nation of the UK. To suggest otherwise is simply wrong, and quite frankly, a misrepresentation of what the Honourable Lady knows to be the case. I would also say to her, she mentioned the TUC. The TUC welcomed the introduction of the job support scheme, and I'm grateful to their help in designing it.
Harriet Baldwin.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Last week, the IMF singled out for praise the UK's response to economic response to the coronavirus, citing the timeliness, the speed of response, the generosity and the flexibility of the approach. And I quote, the Director General said, "We welcome the continuing efforts of the government to refine its support measures." Does my right honourable friend also agree to the second part of what the IMF said last week, that over the medium to long term, we do need to put the UK public finances back on a sustainable footing?
My honourable friend is absolutely right, and she will, of course, know this well from her own experience. And we welcome the independent scrutiny of institutions like the IMF. They are helpful in providing accountability for the government in its economic response, and I'm delighted they were so positive about what we have done. But she is also right that they said correctly that over the medium term, we must restore public finances to a sustainable position. Now is a time to provide fiscal support through a very weak period, but we want to build resilience for future crises. So when the next one of these comes along, we can respond in the same strong and generous way that we have been able to this time.
Video link. Alex Davies-Jones.
Diolch, Mr Deputy Speaker. I'm pleased to see the Chancellor finally in his place today, but for constituents of mine in Pontypridd and for everyone across Wales, his words are a case of it's too little and too late. I'm aware that the UK Government has confirmed that devolved administrations will receive Barnett consequentials in respect of new funding. However, I know from experience that people in Wales cannot and should not rely on yet another promise from this UK Government. The Chancellor will also be aware that this is not the first time that funding has been promised to the people in Pontypridd. I would like to take this opportunity to remind him him of the devastating flooding that decimated communities across Rhondda and Taff earlier this year, and it would be most irresponsible of this government and utterly unfair for people in Wales if they are left behind once again. This government has already blocked the Welsh Government from using both the coronavirus job retention scheme and the job support scheme, and businesses in Wales are suffering now. So will the Chancellor therefore finally commit to fair funding for people in Wales, and will he agree to meet with me and fellow MPs who represent Rhondda and Taff to allow our constituents the best possible chance as we move through the coronavirus pandemic?
Well, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I'd say to the Honourable Lady that I'm glad that over 10,000 of her constituents have had their jobs supported by the furlough scheme that the UK government has provided. And I'm also glad to say that the Welsh Government will now have received £5 billion in upfront funding guarantees for Barnet, £600 million more, and that as a result of announcements today. And I'm sure she can talk to the Welsh Government about how they plan to use that money to support her constituents.
Rick Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I warmly welcome my right honourable friend's statement this morning, measures that will protect jobs and livelihoods both through this lockdown and give businesses, as they plan for 2021 and beyond, real hope and confidence that there are better days ahead. And with that in mind, does my right honourable friend agree with me and the Bank of England, whose forecasts this morning have shown economic activity in the UK is being supported by our substantial fiscal and monetary policy action, and their assessment that the extended coronavirus job retention scheme will mitigate significantly the impact of weaker economic activity in the labour market?
I thank my honourable friend for the question, and he's absolutely right. It's important for monetary and fiscal policy to be coordinated well, as he said, and I'm glad that we're achieving that. And it's also good to see the Bank of England recognising what the IMF and the Office for Budget Responsibility have also highlighted, is that our interventions in the labour market, our furlough scheme and others have succeeded in suppressing the rise of unemployment, and that will remain our single overriding goal, to keep people in work.
Video link. Christine Jardine.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The Chancellor told us in a statement that people and businesses want to know what comes next, how long we plan to keep the scheme open and on what terms. They want certainty. They certainly do. And that is why businesses and individuals in my constituency of Edinburgh West and across this country are so tired of this constant chop and change. So will the Chancellor today admit that what he has to do is extend furlough through to the summer, to June of 2021, and give those businesses the certainty they need to plan?
Well, Mr. Speaker, we've provided that certainty through to the end of spring, at the same time as also saying that we will review the scheme in January to make sure that it's operating well, and at that point review the employer contribution. Combined with all the other interventions we've made, I think that does provide the medium-term certainty that businesses need to plan through the winter and beyond.
Catherine Fletcher.
Yeah. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I'm pretty awed, to be honest, by just the incredible scale of the support that this government is putting in place for the people of South Ribble and beyond. We've got a massive recovery to undertake, where those jobs and employment, it's absolutely vital. There is £2 billion being invested in Kickstart, creating opportunities for people leaving education. Does my right honourable friend agree with me that prioritising help for these people, young workers, such as those leaving Runshaw College in Leyland, is the right thing to do and a key part of how we're going to recover?
Yeah. My honourable friend is absolutely right. It is young people that are most impacted economically by the crisis we're experiencing, and she's absolutely right that they should be at the heart of our thinking about the recovery. The Kickstart scheme is at the centre of that, providing fully funded job placements for at-risk young people. Tens of thousands are starting their jobs in the coming days and weeks, and we look forward to those young people having a new springboard to a bright career in her constituency and elsewhere.
Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Can I thank the Chancellor for what he has said today? The equality for all of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, whether you're in Edinburgh or Cardiff or London or Belfast, you're treated equally, and that's good news. Can I just ask, in relation to the Northern Ireland Assembly, who's been in a circuit breaker for the last 2 weeks, that the help will be, as the Chancellor said, right through until March, but should it go beyond that, it's very important to have that in place. And could the Chancellor state what support will be given to businesses? A specific question here that have recently been set up but have been excluded from the financial support schemes and are under extreme pressure for their very survival. It's good to hear that the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland has been treated equally, but it's also good to have something for those small companies that just set up. Thank you.
Well, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I can confirm that all our job schemes work on a UK-wide basis, treating everyone equally wherever they live, and that will continue always to be the case. I'm also pleased to confirm today an increase in the upfront funding guarantee for Barnet Consequential to Northern Ireland, bringing the total to £2.8 billion, a £400 million increase today, and I'm sure the Northern Ireland Executive can use that funding to support businesses in the way that the Honourable Member describes.
Robin Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Can I thank my right honourable friend for the support that we have received? In Aberconwy, 8,800 jobs have been protected through the Job Retention Scheme. Across Wales, 82,000 self-employed people have also been supported. Indeed, across Scotland, Northern Ireland and the whole of Wales, there's been unprecedented levels of support through schemes, through Barnet Consequentials and more throughout this pandemic. So could my right honourable friend just confirm again that this House stands for the whole of the United Kingdom, that it's our shared markets and economy, strong economy, that makes this level of support possible, and that all parts of our union will continue to receive the attention and support of our government?
Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend put it incredibly well. This has been a crisis that has engulfed our entire United Kingdom, and we will get through it together as one United Kingdom, and this government will continue to support businesses and people wherever they live.
Video link. Gerald Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Whilst I'm disappointed that there was no mention of those who have been excluded so far, I welcome much of what the Chancellor has said, particularly in relation to the devolved nations. However, when I asked just 2 weeks ago for greater flexibility for the Welsh Government to support jobs during its firebreak, that support was not forthcoming. Greater Manchester and other parts of the north of England received a similar response. So could I ask the Chancellor if he and the government realise that pitting areas of the UK against each other only serves to damage the integrity of the United Kingdom, and I urge him to recognise the need for equity across the Union.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, there is equity across the Union. I thank the honourable gentleman for welcoming the measures, but there is equity because everyone is treated exactly the same under these nationwide schemes. With regard to support in Wales, as I said, £600 million more announced today for the Welsh Government, bringing the total up to £5 billion of funding. And again, I'm sure the Welsh Government can use that money in the way that he suggests to support businesses if that's indeed what they want to do.
Jonathan Gallas.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. May I also add my name to the long list of people who are thanking my honourable friends' unprecedented support once again, which will be a great source of comfort to the residents of Stoke-on-Trent North, Kidsgrove and Torque. And may I raise the fact there is a financial incentive, not just through the Kickstart scheme for the under-25s, but now a financial incentive for the over-25s when it comes to apprenticeships, which will be a huge boost to the jobs and economic recovery of Stoke-on-Trent and Staffordshire. And so will he agree with me that this type of scheme is exactly the way forward and that employers should be taking it up to ensure that we can reskill and retrain what is, in Stoke-on-Trent, sadly, a workforce that is largely low-skilled and therefore stuck in some cases, low-wage jobs?
My honourable friend is absolutely right. For, I think, almost the first time, there is now a cash incentive for businesses to take older apprentices on, given the particular nature of this crisis we face. I'm glad that that will help train and reskill people in his constituency. I hope many of them find their way to the world-beating ceramics industry that he champions so well, who I know will also be heartened by the extension of the furlough scheme today.
Questa puntata è offerta da Bellissima Pizza, 100% made in Italy. I nostri kit sono l'ideale per stare insieme, divertirsi e godersi una pizza italiana. Ordina oggi e ricevi domani a casa in tutto il Regno Unito.
Scarica l'applicazione di TeleLondra, è gratuita e rimani connesso con il mondo italiano in UK. Ricevi le informazioni per gli italiani in UK tutti i giorni. Questa puntata è offerta da Fattoria Donnatina, il negozio delle eccellenze semplici e naturali, anche online, senza uscire di casa. Cercaci su donnatinastore.com.
Semola di alta qualità, 8 uova per chilo di farina. Questa era la ricetta delle nostre nonne che noi ora usiamo per produrre la pasta di Camerino. Trovi anche la linea Murabi dall'alto valore proteico e basso contenuto glicemico e glutinico. Smetti di mangiare pasta e inizia a mangiare una signora pasta. Pasta di Camerino, la pasta di una volta, sulle tavole di oggi.
Se anche tu vuoi fare pubblicità su Telelondra, scrivici a info@telelondra.uk o contattaci al numero 07 43 21 99 430.